Good afternoon, and thanks so much for this amazing and kind opportunity to speak with you all today. Special thanks to Mike Noonan, the organizing committee for the conference, and to the AES as a whole, not only for this opportunity unto itself, but actually for the immense impact that the society and so many amazing people who are involved in it have had on my life and my career. I cannot say enough amazing things about it. So I am part of the technology evangelism team at Apple in worldwide developer relations. And in short, our team works to help developers create amazing apps and experiences that help enrich people's lives. Now, broadly speaking, this might mean apps that offer tools for creativity, the ones you may use every day. They might enable the delivery of medicine to remote parts of the world. They might power engineering and construction projects, or perhaps just offer an opportunity for relaxation through games and entertainment, just as a few examples. We do this a variety of ways. One of the ways we might do this is through the Worldwide Developer Conference each June, where we have thousands of developers arrive each year in person and then have thousands upon thousands more tune into our live streams from around the world to learn about the latest technologies we have to offer, and most importantly, the best practices that we offer in their implementation. We then honor the best of the best with the Apple Design Awards. We also create technical videos and educational tools, such as the Human Interface Guidelines, or these videos we just released, to help developers understand how to make the best use of our new phones and watches. We also act as a bridge and interpreter between the product marketing group, engineering, design, and third-party developers, bringing developer advocacy, context, and viewpoint into the product and SDK conversations. We also get to engage directly with individual developers and companies, offering perhaps deep review of the design and technical elements of their applications, providing guidance on taking their products from good to great. Now, with my more specific focus on media technologies, I have the great honor and privilege of getting to work with audio, video, broadcast, and creative organizations on a worldwide basis, helping to provide technical and strategic guidance on the development of applications for iOS, watchOS, macOS, and tvOS. And then, even more so, the delivery and playback of media content within those applications. And so it's on the basis of these engagements that I'm going to speak to you today and offer what I feel to be, one possible definition of modern media, what the characteristics of that might be, a historical context to how we maybe got here as an industry, and some thoughts that might help us think forward as to what may be coming next and how we can be ready for it and embrace it. I believe that much of the media landscape today can be defined within actually about 5 characteristics. And it's through the understanding of these that the industry as a whole can continue to move ahead, innovate, and offer the types of experiences that are so incredibly important to us, educationally, culturally. And the first of these characteristics is something I'd like to call ubiquity of access. Now, historically, the ability to listen to an audio recording, maybe view a piece of news footage, or take in a film, was tied to the timed broadcast by a controlling organization, or perhaps the physical possession of an actual piece of media containing that content. And in the latter case, the ability to procure that media would also be very limited, perhaps in quantity or in time. Now, not all of these factors are absent today, but certainly the expectation of access from consumers has changed in such a profound and significant way. Now, this really all started earnest about 20 years ago with the introduction of peer-to-peer file sharing and applications such as Napster, which were the first to offer nearly unfettered access to music or, for variably, rapid download and consumption. Now, I suspect everyone in this room knows and understands this part of the story quite well. But I think the most important piece of this, and the most important part to take away, is the juxtaposition of incredibly limited access to content being afforded through legitimate means, and then these often illegal mechanisms offering nearly absolute access. Industry hadn't yet mapped or wrapped their minds around how to create a seamless, legal path to enable consumers to purchase a piece of content. And without concern for the impact on the industry, consumers naturally followed the path of least resistance. The historical command and control pathways of content had broken down. Age-old assumptions of how to reach consumers were shattered. The decoupling of content from physical media enabled piracy and distribution of those pirated assets with a speed and efficiency never before conceived. Needless to say, the recording industry tried to shut all of this down by taking down companies like Napster, soon to discover that the distributed nature of peer-to-peer technology and the large number of companies offering it simply led to a game of whack-a-mole. With each system that was brought down through the courts, a new one gained popularity. The global and relatively borderless nature of the internet only compounded these challenges. Industry fought back again, this time by bringing down the hammer of law on individual consumers who may or may not have actually understood the legalities of what they were doing. And so, funny enough, companies believed that by suing their own customers and holding them up as examples of what could happen to you should you take part in this file-sharing revolution, that perhaps they could discourage others from doing the same. Well, they couldn't have been more wrong. It wasn't actually until the advent of online modern music marketplaces, such as iTunes as one example, that consumers again began to significantly change their habits. And what this has shown is that the concern with access to music wasn't just about the cost, but was very much about convenience. When offered a fast, reasonably priced, and safe way to purchase content, consumers were more than happy to pay. Interestingly, this trend continues today in markets known for rampant piracy, such as China and Russia. When offered high-quality content on reasonable financial and access terms, customers are actually willing to open their wallets. This is enabling a new wave of media and distribution in these markets through apps like iQIYI. For example, in China, and I found this fascinating, access to a popular reality show a mere 30 minutes sooner than their friends and the broader populace offers the opportunity for so much social media prowess that it commands a premium that many are willing to pay, to be the first. Now, thankfully, the industry continues to thrive, albeit very differently than before this revolution. And artists are now able to more directly engage with the audiences of their content. And audiences are able to seek out content from new and upcoming artists in ways that may not have been possible or even accessible when the market was so much more centralized. Now, another factor that's really important in this concept of ubiquity of access is the multitude of devices being used today by consumers. Now, they may have an iPhone in their pocket, an iPad and a MacBook Pro in their bag, an Apple Watch on their wrist, and then an Apple TV in their living room, if they only have one of each. Now, each of these devices offers different capabilities and characteristics, but the general expectation from consumers is that they should be able to enjoy content on the device they happen to want to use, that they have with them at that moment. They might start watching a television show on their iPhone while on the train or bus, and then complete that show on their Apple TV at home. Now, although access and distribution rights have generally been granted historically on the size of the screen in the past, thankfully this is rapidly changing as content agreements are renewed, and it's instead becoming more about the mechanism of distribution, linear and over the top. Movement of people around the world is also only increasing. And the customer expectation is that the content that they have access to at home should be accessible everywhere they go. Now, this is actually an area where content licenses are incredibly fragmented, especially when it comes to television and film content. In some cases, access to view a show is governed by your physical location in a given postal code, while in other cases, it might just be based on your billing address. These inconsistencies lead to so much confusion and frustration amongst consumers. For example, imagine downloading your favorite shows at home in one country before you go on vacation, only to discover that they're automatically wiped off your device when you arrive at your vacation destination because you connected to a local network. Sadly, this happens all the time. This is commonplace in today's consumer experience. We have a lot of room to go here. Thankfully, in some parts of the world, this is actually starting to change. As of April 2018, the European Union has put into force the regulation on cross-border portability of online content services in the internal market. Thankfully, it's also known as the Portability Regulation. Now, this regulation states that it's your billing address or residency location, not your physical location the moment you actually access the content, that is to be used to determine your rights. The location for the sake of rights is verified at the time of registration, such as maybe your payment details, the existence of an internet contract, or your IP address at that moment. As a result, the content that one would have access to at home in Paris is the same as when they are traveling in Germany. Now, this is very sharp in contrast to the experience here right now in North America, where a show I might have access to in my home in San Francisco cannot be viewed while I'm visiting here in Canada, for example. Now, I don't know if this regulation is going to be extended beyond the EU, but it certainly highlights the degree to which various regulatory environments are beginning to shift the approach to better reflect expectations of consumers. And that's ubiquity of access. Modern technologies and networks have enabled new marketplaces and have created new customer expectations of how and where they can purchase, listen to, and watch media content. And that expectation is founded in convenience, reasonable cost, and the ability to view it on the screen they happen to have with them wherever they might be. As we've seen, barriers to access are readily circumvented, and the path to success is about meeting the consumer where they want to be. Now, the second characteristic I'd like to discuss is the abstraction of formats from physical media. Now, much of what I will discuss here really feeds a lot into the first point about access, but I think it's incredibly important to shift our expectations about how media formats emerge and evolve, and the importance for the industry to be able to react very efficiently to all of these changes. Looking at the evolution of audio recording, for example, the characteristics, fidelity, and duration of recorded audio has often been and historically been defined by the physical characteristics of the recording media itself, whether that might be a cylinder coated in wax, a disc of acetate traced with a needle, a reel of magnetized tape, or tiny grooves engraved into plastic and read with a laser. Each of these technologies in their day offered a new level of fidelity and capability over the prior, and offered production a very precise target format and device of consumption. In all, the signal path from the professional studio to the consumer's loudspeakers was relatively predictable in each era, and great assumptions were made at all phases of the production process as a result. Today, those assumptions can't be made. The container for any given piece of content is simply a digital file of one format or another. The particular mechanism of carriage, be it a hard drive, an SSD, or streaming, is in many cases irrelevant and forever subject to change. Consumer playback technologies continue to improve, and the leaps in capacity and capability often predate the ability for professionals to create content that actually takes advantage of those capabilities. It's also the case that as real-time software encoding and decoding of media becomes possible on the CPU and GPU, there has been this proliferation of new codecs and formats, further allowing for experimentation, collaboration, and the creation of amazing new tools. But yet, this also presents such an enormous challenge for the industry. Interoperability and longevity of assets has become so increasingly complex. and can become very confusing for consumers as well. For example, since now it's the case that anyone can create a new codec or format, the role of standards and industry organizations, I believe, is more important than ever. One such effort, which Apple has actually been deeply involved in, is the Common Media Application Format, or CMAF. This is an MPEG standard with the goal of unifying the assets and encryption for streaming media. There's actually two dominant streaming technologies today. The first one, HLS, was introduced by Apple and the Internet Engineering Task Force back in 2009. And then MPEG-, a competing standard, was introduced by MPEG in 2011. Now, historically, HLS was based on the use of transport stream segments, while MPEG- used MP4 segments, or fragments. Subtitles, of course, were provided by different formats. Encryption modes were also different. Now, we have standards here, but it was a matter of deciding which standard to use, which makes this really not so standard. CMAF, for example, has unified the type of media to be stored on the server, which is fragmented MP4 and IMSC1 subtitles. There's still two possible encryption modes, but the industry is finally congealing around one of them, therefore allowing the utilization of one set of keys, one set of media, to deliver content across multiple platforms and multiple DRM key delivery systems. Ultimately, this means that storage requirements get cut in half. It simplifies development and delivery pathways, and overall offers a massive win for industry. So I'd like to suggest that this is a pretty good example of where a standards body was able to bring convergence and reduce complexity for both industry and consumers alike. High dynamic range video, though, could be held up as a current example of where things have maybe not gone quite so smoothly from an industry standardization standpoint. And I can't help but think that this might have only hurt the adoption of what I believe is a very, very meaningful evolution in video delivery. There's at least currently 5 competing formats, with more on the way. Now, we offer support for 2 of those formats right now on our devices, Dolby Vision and HDR10. But then, because not all televisions support all formats, we actually perform tone mapping and color space conversion on the GPU, converting as needed to ensure that the customer gets as optimal an experience as possible based on the available source and output display modes. Interestingly, content originators don't really necessarily like this, but at this moment, this is the only way to fit this all together. Somebody has to translate. All of that aside, I think as the dust settles on this front, it's just a lesson again that it behooves content creators to create the highest quality possible in color space, dynamic range, resolution, all of this to future-proof their production efforts as much as possible. I also think that it's incredibly important for the industry as a whole to remain so very deeply engaged in standardization efforts and to participate in industry forums such as CTA Wave that are helping to standardize on a specific standard across the industry. In this new world of fluidity of formats and codecs, I think this is critical to ongoing success. The formats and capabilities of a given day is no longer defined and restrained by physical media. This is a great opportunity for innovation with an equally great risk of fragmentation. Standards bodies are more critical now than ever, and we need to think very much towards the future when creating content. All right. This third characteristic, and this came up a lot this morning in the earlier conversation, I'd like to call the democratization of creative tools. I think it's a source of immense opportunity, and it has also pretty much turned the production industry on its head. This applies to both tools used by creatives and professionals, but also the ability to create new tools themselves. For much of the history of audio and video, access to professional equipment has been gated by cost, and being a professional was at least partially defined by that access. But in the modern age, whereby a film destined for acclaim at prestigious film festivals can be entirely shot using an iPhone, We are now in a time where the limits of creativity are not so much defined by access to equipment, but by the limits of one's imagination, ingenuity, and skill. The processing power contained within mobile devices has increased by orders of magnitude and trumps that of the performance of the best supercomputers of only a brief period ago. GPU performance, incredibly critical in media applications, has improved by even greater margins. For example, in 2015, the film Tangerine premiered at Sundance to much fanfare. And this film was actually shot entirely using the iPhone 5S. And this kind of led the way for this kind of production for the industry. The film Unsane by director Steven Soderbergh, shot in 4K using the iPhone 7 Plus, premiered this year at International Film Festival Berlin. But perhaps even more important than the aforementioned professional examples is that these technologies have become readily accessible to the masses, including some of the youngest developers who ever joined us at the Worldwide Developer Conference. The monetary cost continues to go down, and the ease of use enables those who have skills in areas outside of pure technology to realize their creative dreams. To put it more succinctly, expertise in computing is no longer a prerequisite to expert skill in utilizing computers. I feel like this democratization is incredibly apparent in the realm of software development. The creation of tools for creatives, whereby the introduction of software SDKs that offer abstraction, that abstract the creation of software tools from the complexities of underlying hardware, have enabled a new wave of developers. The ultimate talent of these developers is not necessarily based purely in computer science, but rather the ability to deeply understand the problem spaces of their area of expertise and to be able to envision and execute the creation of solutions to those problem spaces. Programming has become infinitely more accessible. And any historic stereotypes of what a developer may be or look like must be dispatched from our minds in order to truly realize the current and future potential. As an example of this simplification, I'd like to consider the act of playing back a piece of streaming media on an iPhone. The code required to create a player and load a piece of content at a given URL is simply this. With these 3 lines, a piece of music, located on servers on the other side of the globe, begins to play wirelessly to your headphones. That's pretty incredible. Under the hood, though, an enormous number of complex activities, of course, are undertaken, all the way from the modulation of the Wi-Fi and cellular radios being used to connect to the network, to the transport of data over that network, the management of memory on the device as those data packets are being reassembled, the decoding of the audio and video data, and then the final rendering of the resultant video and audio frames with such great fidelity. But yet, as a creator of an application to listen to music or to watch video, all of these layers of complexity are largely abstracted, allowing the focus to remain on the actual customer experience of watching a video or listening to the music. And fundamentally, these layers of abstraction are actually the foundation and structure now for modern computing. For me, my personal aha moment was back in 2011, when at CTV we created this little tool for news gathering using the iPhone 4S known as iGateway. This tool simply enabled the upload of audio and video files over cellular networks, filing the media directly into the CTV News content management system. This allowed for coverage of stories long before the satellite truck could arrive, further enforcing the notion that the best camera is the one that you have with you. Nowadays, the ability to capture and upload footage is extremely commonplace in the industry. But in 2011, we proved that a couple of people with an idea for a simple tool like this, yet with truly relatively little development skills, could bring it to life within a matter of a few weeks. I think another interesting element is not just the substitution of so-called professional equipment for consumer devices, but also for the ability to create new forms of creative tools not before possible. As one example, the Noise app by Rolly makes use of 3D touch technology in the iPhone to turn your device into a pressure-sensitive virtual instrument. Haptics help to inform the artist of the state of two-dimensional controls through physical feedback of virtual detents and range extremes. A smooth piece of glass suddenly becomes so much more, enabling limitless virtual representation of controls and surfaces tuned to the instrument at hand. New forms of musical instruments become possible. The ability to create is no longer bound by one's physical location relative to bulky pieces of machinery. Everyone who has an iPhone in their pocket carries with them a tool that can capture musical ideas, edit and sequence those ideas, or even share a mix. Now, of course, the incredible capabilities of professional tools outside of the smartphone continues to march onwards. But access to those specific tools is no longer an impenetrable barrier to those with creative ideas. The world is truly a global market, and that's unlikely to change. Borders for physical goods can be challenging at times, but for the sake of digital goods, things flow pretty freely. Now, that earlier point about EU portability regulation highlights that this is even becoming a point of intent and focus within regulatory bodies. As a result, opportunity has risen for what may have been niche players in the media market. Subjects that may not have actually garnered enough interest or domestic audience to justify existence through traditional broadcast and distribution mechanisms have become truly viable in a global, over-the-top market. An individual with modest means has the ability to create, market, and distribute content on a global basis with relatively little capital investment. It is the underlying idea and the content itself that matters the most. And I think this shift is incredibly exciting. This has also led, though, to immense consumer choice and confusion in how to engage with and purchase access to content. Only a short time ago, the means to access a broadcast or a popular show was limited to terrestrial over-the-air or a contract subscription with a cable or satellite provider, also known as a BDU in Canada or an MVPD in many other countries. So now we're in this place where there's at least 4 patterns of consumer access to this type of content: over-the-air, BDU subscription, hybrid OTT via BDU, and pure OTT. And then monetization models are also equally diverse. You have advertising-based video on demand, subscription-based video on demand, transaction-based video on demand. It becomes an incredibly complex matrix. Thankfully, recent studies all point towards eventual industry convergence around over-the-top, with nearly all market players worldwide already seeing part or most of their business oriented towards OTT delivery. And when we think about it, it only makes sense. The transmission path has converged around the use of commodity networks and HTTP caching infrastructure for delivery, as opposed to private networks and bespoke protocols. Even companies who may be planning to make use of multicast technologies to reduce their overall private network throughput still actually look to the use of OTT delivery as a fallback to multicast on those networks, as well as a mechanism for delivery to the broader web. Consumers also have new expectations. They expect to only pay for the content they wish to consume, and they expect unlimited access to what they are paying for, a la carte. They also wish to be able to turn on and off the tap as desired. Netflix introduced the idea of binge viewing, introducing an entire season of a show all at once, ready to be viewed at whatever pace the consumer wishes, even perhaps through a single night. However, this consumption pattern is at odds with companies who have traditionally released content gradually throughout a full season. Companies are now experimenting with how to retain consumer engagement throughout the year, which is what has led other pure over-the-top providers, such as Hulu, to gradually release their content and episodes on a periodic basis throughout the season. Now, both models work, but the binge model requires such a different content strategy than the gradual release approach. then again, one might think in this age of subscriptions that advertising is dead. But it actually seems to be alive and well, with industry putting equal emphasis on actually both monetization models. The ads might be fewer in number, but are increasingly valuable due to the precision and targeting capabilities of modern ad networks. Consumers are actually willing to be faced with advertising so long as the amount of it is proportionate to the perceived value of the content they might get for free in return. The precision targeting capabilities of these ad networks, however, does bring up a plethora of concerns about data privacy and personal information sharing. And I think this is an incredibly important topic, but we're going to keep it out of scope for the conversation today. All right, in summary, business models, the size of the accessible market, and the path to reach consumers has changed significantly. Direct access in both monetization and delivery is enabling the convergence of the emergence of niche players, as well as a new way of operating media companies. Consumers have more choice than ever, and it presents both great challenge and great opportunity for all of us involved. Now, finally, I want to finish with a discussion about user experience. This is a topic incredibly close to my heart and a massive focus of our work with app developers. The onus of user experience has largely shifted to the content originator. And the surface area of brand representation has expanded well beyond the actual content itself. Interestingly, this shift is still proving to be a major challenge for many content owners and providers. Not so long ago, the path for content delivery was very clearly defined. The responsibilities of the organization creating the content ended at the delivery master, meeting the specifications detailed in a distributor agreement. Naturally, those in production had to be intimately aware with the nuances of the viewing environment, insofar as the typical performance of the typical viewing environment is concerned for audio and video reproduction. However, the precise mechanism of consumption and the end-to-end delivery path was out of scope. Its fine leaving here could be interpreted as an acceptable and fair statement. After all, the user interface was simply the entry of a channel number, and anything beyond that was in the hands of the purveyor of the set-top box. Concern over the moment-to-moment viewing experience for each individual, unique viewer was impossibly out of scope. This has changed massively in recent years. What defines a product goes beyond the content itself and requires detailed attention not only for content creation, but also the encoding, the encryption, the packaging, the origin and cache infrastructure, and finally the actual application running on the end consumer's device. It's this app experience that I wish to focus on now. Now, each modern app platform, iOS and tvOS included, offers a specific set of user interface patterns and idioms that ultimately define the experience and the expectations on that platform. And the key to success in this new environment is to look at the creation of these app experiences from the position of the consumer who will be using it, relative to their expectations of the platform that they are using. Think of it this way. If each application running on your device were to offer a completely different set of interface patterns, the cognitive load in doing what should be a simple task, tuning into a TV show, becomes so significantly higher. One size does not fit all when it comes to cross-platform, and there's no magic pill that's just going to make this challenge go away. My point is this: the app experience is the product, inclusive of the content. And this paradigm is not changing. To try and overtly minimize the design and development effort on this front by painting all platforms with the same brush only leads to consumer confusion and frustration. We've seen this pattern for decades with cross-platform tools like Java, PhoneGap, and Xamarin, to name just a few. And yet, we're never actually able to see this approach work out well in the long term for either the software developer or the consumer. This isn't changing anytime soon. What does this mean for media companies? Well, the goal of platform-specific UI development is at first glance at odds with the desire to minimize the cost of development. After all, in many organizations, the development of apps for content delivery is still seen as an unfortunate burden and cost. Yet, I would argue that in fact, this presents an opportunity to cement the presence of your brand in the mind and heart of the consumer, based in both the quality of content and the overall experience you offer in engaging with that content. This behooves the creator of content in this new world to put as much thought, craft, and care into the last mile of content delivery as is done for the rest of the product. To realize that the experience of consumption is as much a part of the programming as anything else. And this requires that traditional content organizations become agile and software-oriented development and technology firms. This is a challenging shift, as it requires months or years of forethought, and also yet the ability to readily adapt to rapid changes in the market and technology and trends. But to have control over the end-to-end experience actually offers the opportunity to compete on so much more than just the content alone, but also on the ease of that content discovery, ancillary content, the quality of that delivery, and the information about a given show or film, as well as the opportunity to offer a level of fidelity and experience that scales significantly beyond the capabilities of any traditional delivery path. To have an app-based presence on a mobile device offers what might be the most intimate interaction with the brand yet to be realized. To actually touch it, to carry it with you in your travels, and to bring it with you into the most private of spaces. An incredible opportunity, and one that still only touches the surface of what might be possible. And that's a brief highlight on what I believe to be the importance of user experience. The direct access that artists now have to consumers of their content has made the world's markets more accessible, offers an incredible opportunity to compete on quality of experience, but also has moved the burden of controlling that experience closer to the artists themselves. Today, I've offered you 5 characteristics of a modern media experience: ubiquity of access, abstraction from physical media, the democratization of creative tools, the shifts in monetization in audience to the globe, and the importance of user experience. I do not purport to suggest that these are the only factors, or that my discussion of any of these 5 factors is in any way complete. But I think they do actually encompass much of what we are all seeing and feeling in the market today. In the modern media context, each of these characteristics brings both great challenges and great opportunities for innovation at all levels. Access to worldwide markets, the ability to connect directly with the consumers of your product, the ability to create high-quality content wherever you might be, with a tool that fits in your pocket and travels with you everywhere, the ability to expand the experience of consumption beyond that of content itself, and to bring a thoughtful, elegant, integrated app experience to your consumers. A lot has changed in recent years, and I'm afraid to say that the pace of that change is not slowing. I think it's a pretty incredible time, though, to be part of this industry, and I'm excited to share in that experience with all of you. I hope this conversation today has perhaps elucidated a few key elements, maybe has brought a few new ideas or thoughts in your own mind. But if nothing else, I look forward to where you all take your art and your craft next. Thank you.
We've got time for some questions. I'll chum the waters with one. And I won't ask a question that you can't or won't answer.
Because there are those, I'm afraid.
Probably more than I care to consider. So I'll ask you to take your Apple hat off. You can't unknow what you know, but I'll take your Apple hat off, put your audio guy hat back on, because that's all of us people here. Okay. Draw me a line in Josh Tidsbury's head as someone who, pushes faders around occasionally in his spare time and has done in past. Draw me a line between those 5 items and what could be possible in your mind? What are the practical implications of those 5 things as it lands on a sonic universe?
You picked such an easy one to start with.
Josh, that's why they pay you the big bucks. Come on now.
So I think the first point, the move away from being tied to a physical media format, I think is in many ways the freeing experience that was being discussed this morning, the move away from having to deal with analog tape, the ability to deal with digital formats, the ability to share this content worldwide, that you're thinking so far beyond the delivery of the current master. The discussion this morning around the challenges of having to then deliver 400 stems for live performance. I'm afraid that this is actually probably not going to slow down. In fact, as we move into a world of object-based audio, as we move into a world where the rendering of the audio is pushed further and further and closer to the consumer, the need for flexibility, even a microphone, flexibility and dynamism at the production side is increasingly more important. So if nothing else, it means that you can't count on a constant in terms of the carrier, but you can count on the requirement to capture at as high a quality and high a performance as possible, knowing that the bar keeps moving. That was the first one. Let's go back there.
You don't need to answer all 5 of them, but
I think the other one that is so incredibly important for what we were talking about earlier today is the democratization of creative tools. I kind of came in right as studios were tanking. I timed that horribly. But thankfully I fell into broadcast, which was incredible. And part of that was really just the leading edge of this. I think the thing that it meant, and this could be an unpopular statement. I feel like what it in a large way has done is shown those who are the truest of professionals and are truly committed to the craft, because it has moved us away from access to gear being the reason you are a pro. I mean, that's still true for the sake of front end, microphones and stuff, but you can rent these things. But I think what it speaks to is, certainly with the crew that's in this room, it's about expertise. It's about being able to take the hands of creatives who have incredible ideas and have these amazing pieces of sonic work that they want to create, and helping them understand how to make use of these tools to the benefit of the overall professional result. This is going to take a lot of education, and the scope of that education has broadened so much. I think and the only people who can actually bring that education forward are you. There's no other path.
Thanks, Josh. Who's next? Jim?
Given another part of your background, that being neuroscience, is there any potential of developing an app that would turn your iPhone into a functional MRI? Or other neuropsych tools?
I don't know. At this point, nothing will surprise me.
Wouldn't that be a watch?
Well, as of now, you can run a full ECG from your watch.
Not quite now.
Well, one lead,
Soon.
a single lead.
Hi, Josh.
Hi.
I also first met you in 2006 when we recorded a big band together at
Yes,
BAM.
we did. That was fun.
We just kept going from there. Importance of user experience to me seems to be, other than, again, the democratization of creative tools, which we all think is wonderful but hated when it happened. The user experience has always what it's been about, isn't it? Whether it be a live concert for music, a recorded medium of that you took home, the experience has always been that. We're always under the false impression that when you took a CD or vinyl home that you actually owned the music. Well, you didn't own the music, you only owned the medium of the music. And now we don't have the medium, we stream. So we really don't own anything. And even if we download the music and put it on our digital format, whatever we have, you still don't own it, because legally you can't even will that. Any comments on that?
Well, I have to imagine there's probably a team of about 100 lawyers at Apple who have all kinds of comments on that, but and would have comments on me commenting too much on it. I don't know where to go on that one, sorry.
Hey,
Softball, Peter, please.
you bet. So, I mean, this is fantastic because I think a lot of these things we sort of knew, but what you've done is wrap them up in a package that makes them so much clearer about what's been going on the last while. And I love that you've touched on the artist more than once, the creator at the beginning of this, and in a way they were sort of always the vulnerable one upon whom we are so dependent for the things that we love to do, and in a way it was the producers and the engineers who have always been there or tried to be there for them to protect them and provide an environment in which they could create, and we'd help them deliver what they were trying to deliver. So that piece actually, in a way, hasn't changed. I mean, the way it happens has changed, but that's a constant that you're asking for. And I think maybe this is just an observation, but one of the struggles now is with the democratization of the creative tools and the ubiquity of access, to figure out how to finance that infrastructure, right? So there were record companies that hired producers and got the studio and an engineer and a maintenance crew in, so that creative space was safe for that person. And now you don't even have a piece of vinyl, and you're saying that the artist has to think about the user's experience at the end. So there's this whole other infrastructure that needs to be in place and somehow paid for, and that's perhaps evolving.
Yeah, I mean, as the gatekeepers to content and the gatekeepers to artists have kind of faded more into the background, and the pathway for monetization has become basically consumer to artist, perhaps with a small toll booth here and there, but it's very slight compared to historical context. What it has meant, though, is that that revenue has become so much more diffuse and less concentrated. And so I think, studies vary on this, but overall, artists in general probably better off. Labels and middlemen, not so much. And it's been very challenging for anybody involved in kind of the craft of that production pipeline. I don't know what the answer is, but I can't help but think that it is going to lead to a change in how perhaps those middle people involved, who are incredibly important to the delivery of something that speaks to the actual consumer, user experience of the consumption of that content, maybe those agreements are really going to change. How people pay for that, is it so much that it is a fee for service, or is it going to move more into, much like the artist is being paid on kind of a subscription basis for the access to their content, Does that trend continue into production? I don't know. Is it more about the long tail of revenue as opposed to fee for service and a payment up front? Is it more about moving those involved in the production process into more of a position of being collaborators on the art itself and perceiving the revenue models and the contracts in that kind of a way? I don't know, but it's all possible.
Sorry, just one follow-up thing, and the other thing I'm trying to wrap my head around is a kid who, grew up spending all his money on records and financing an infrastructure, and now what we're doing is paying $10 a month to have instant access to every piece of music ever recorded in the history of sound. How I guess it's difficult to see how new artists come in and compete with that and develop an audience.
Yeah, being heard is certainly a big challenge. Somehow rising above the noise, I think, is incredibly difficult. And I think this speaks again, actually, to the conversation this morning. There are some artists who are incredibly adept at almost having kind of a social media, modern media, internet first kind of approach to their career. That's the first thought in their mind as they undergo an activity. And there are others who aren't wired that way, but thankfully there are other companies who might be able to help out with that. But it's incredibly difficult to get above the noise level. And sometimes the noisiest are not necessarily the best. And that too is incredibly frustrating. I don't know what the magic bullet for that is.
Is access the medium?
Is access the medium? I like that.
Cut it out, Anthony.
Well, I have a follow-up question to that, but because, well, ubiquity of access, the access to your applications is defined by the device that they're on. So the medium that I'm consuming it on is my portable device, therefore it's my application, but my application does absolutely nothing without access.
Correct.
So is access the medium?
I suppose in a way it is, because that speaks to kind of the fluidity of transition at this point.
To follow that up, I love standards. And I've learned that it costs the same to develop your own first as it does to follow somebody else's standard. So I see the IETF and the IEEE and the SIMPTE standards, which is the motion picture standards, and I see the audio engineering standards, et cetera, et cetera. But the CMAF format versus the SIMPTE IMF standard, do you circumvent organizational structures such as SIMPTE and AES and go right to the IETF to have that standard first for somebody else like SIMPTE to come along 10 years down the line to reference something that was pre-existing?
Gotcha. So speaking to the HLS spec, which was basically put forward as a draft through the IETF back in 2009. Part of that was how Apple works. It's like the way we announce things is here it is and it's here today, and don't pay any attention to the fact that there was probably 4 years of work getting to that. It's only about that moment. And so also for the sake of streaming delivery in 2009, there was no competing standard, really. There were multicast type approaches. There were unicast approaches that required individual direct connections on a per client basis to a server that were terribly unscalable on a global basis. But I don't think it was about circumventing anything. The CMAF and IMF thing is interesting because IMF is much more about interoperability from a professional mezzanine kind of level, whereas CMAF is all about that last mile of delivery. So it's after it's been already transcoded and packaged down to H.264, HEVC, or whatever is next. There's profiles for all kinds of codecs. It's about the consumer delivery format and trying to make sure that that does not continue to become more fragmented. Similar to, I think, what IMF is on the kind of more professional level.
Anyone else? Wow, okay. I've got one more then, and we'll close it out. We've had to, you and I have had this conversation many times, and I'm certain everyone in this room at some point has had the discussion about having to choose between creating a piece of rich media that has pictures and sound, which historically and even today nominally involves putting a low bridge over audio fidelity, versus an audio-only product, which happily and wonderfully today can feature, massively high resolution, whether it's sample rates, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Is there any reason in your mind that the future shouldn't be a choose-your-own-adventure kind of thing, where if someone wished to truly, we all sort of get, I think, at some level, the idea of creating at the maximum possible mm-hmm. resolution and granularity so that you're sort of future-proof. Except inevitably, especially in audio and visual constructions today, it's not actually possible to do that. Sort of 48/24 is where you bump your head on the ceiling and have a big goose egg mm-hmm. if you're trying to tie yourself to picture. So is there any particular reason in your understanding of the future where that we shouldn't just be able to explode through that ceiling? And if we want to create that, live concert at 384/24 so that someday we can do something else with it. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't necessarily preclude ourselves from creating a piece of content today that'll work as a quote-unquote television experience.
Yes. I don't think, I feel like those current limitations are in many ways largely artificial at this juncture. Already for streaming media, you can offer a payload whereby you're effectively, and it's not there yet, but effectively lossless AAC. You could package up, you could send wave over the wire if somebody had enough bandwidth. And it's already in the place where the layers of the media transmission pipeline are already separate. You have multiple video payload options combined with, as many as maybe even 40 different options that the device is selecting from at any point in time, combined with 5 or 6 different audio payload options. It might be, high efficiency AAC for, poor cellular connectivity that dynamically shifts to LC when you move into a better network, that when you get home, maybe you're watching on an older device and it's just AC3, and then you're on a newer device and suddenly you have Atmos. That's combined with whichever particular flavor of picture happens to be appropriate for that environment, with whichever type of subtitles you want, in whichever language that you want. And because the media has become decoupled, it's only tied together by time. And all of the options are presented to the consumption device. I don't think that there's any reason to think that those limits aren't going to continue to go up.
Great answer, Josh. Everybody, a round of applause for Josh Tidsbury.